Nature understands. Maybe we should listen. I want to take this opportunity to share a few thoughts that have been simmering for a while, which means they're probably relatively well half-baked, though I wanted to sort of get them out before I lost them, and they will continue to simmer, and hopefully over time they'll get a little less half-baked or more well done. I said nature understands. Nature spent 3.4 billion years figuring out this cycle in terms of a person interacting with the environment to get the air, water, and nourishment that they need, and their waste is recycled back into the environment, and it's an ongoing cycle that continues to evolve. And in conjunction with that, internally, nature devised a number of structures that supported a person's existence in terms of respiratory and circulatory and digestive and numerous others, but this is sort of an example of what has to happen internally to enable the rest of this to work also. And while nature spent 3.4 billion years figuring this out, it only took us a few thousand years to screw it up because we said that a person, because these days people are seldom self-sufficient, a person has to deliver value to the environment to get money that they spend to the environment to get stuff to satisfy their needs and wants, and as a result what they do is they create garbage. So we've ended up corrupting this structure to suit our needs, and we call it progress. Additionally, if the person doesn't create enough value to the environment, then they probably have to borrow money someplace, which puts them in debt, which makes them essentially unhealthy in the longer term. And consider what would happen if these internal structures, which are essential for the health and well-being of the person, decided that because they were contributing such a valued contribution to existence, they should get something for it. So suppose that your heart decided, because it is so important in pumping blood, that it should get to keep some of the blood that goes through it, and the liver decides that because of the way that it processes impurities out of the blood, it should get to keep some of the blood that passes through it. You can imagine what would happen after a relatively short period of time with blood collecting in these places. The body itself would become anemic, and the clots would form, and they would kill you. And if you're wondering why I'm actually going down this road, maybe it will become obvious in a few minutes, and maybe it won't. We'll see. I look at a corollary to this in terms of a community and the way it functions in terms of interactions of different entities within the community, in terms of Main Street businesses and individuals that interact to deliver value or services to people, and businesses at production capacity in different industries, and education facilities, and farming to produce food, and all of these different undertakings interact with the community to help maintain the health of the community. Though the community itself, seldom do we ever find any self-sufficient communities anymore, in terms of the individuals and organizations within the community have to deliver value to the environment to get money, to deliver money to the community, to get stuff to satisfy needs and wants, and as a result they create garbage, which is sort of, I think, a corollary to the previous picture. If the community doesn't create enough value to the external environment, if it spends more money than it gets, the community becomes less healthy because there's less money to actually exchange between all of these different factors within the community, and the community typically needs government spending to infusions for it to remain healthy, or the community goes in debt by borrowing money. And what would happen, or what does happen, when there are different businesses and individuals who happen to become prosperous in the midst of these interactions and decide to take money out of the system because they put it in savings that doesn't go back into circulation, or they send it somewhere else, or they just let it pile up. The community itself becomes anemic, becomes unhealthy, unfunctional, because these interactions can't happen because, or are diminished because there simply isn't or aren't sufficient funds to carry on the extent of the interactions that the demand would determine, and the interactions with the external environment are also diminished because of a shortage of money, which people have taken out and sent somewhere else. There's a marvelous book that was written called Why Nations Fail, which proposes that with an inclusive political system, that's one which includes all of the participants, all of the stakeholders, coming together to determine how the community or the state should operate, produces an inclusive economy, which essentially produces a prosperity for all. So it's a wealth and prosperity, and it's a reinforcing cycle that's beneficial for all of the members of the community or the society. What happens within this structure, though, is there are a few who understand how to work the system or create a sufficient value, so they become better off than the majority of the people, and they tend to like that. And they use that wealth that they have gained to produce an exclusive political system, which is sort of some for a few and none for all, so that they take that wealth, create an exclusive political system, which creates an extractive economy intended to create more wealth for them. And this is a vicious it's a virtuous reinforcing structure for those wealthy few. It's called success to the successful in common terms. So it ends up producing a structure which, because of what else happens, the exclusive political system diminishes the inclusive political system, diminishing the inclusive economy, diminishing the prosperity for all. And you would think that this would then diminish the wealth of a few, but this previous structure, this reinforcing structure, overwhelms that balancing structure, so that this continues to promote the wealth of a few, and additionally, the exclusive political system and the extractive economy diminishes the inclusive economy, diminishing the prosperity for all. And you end up with a set of interactions which are essentially much for a few and little for all, which you probably see happen in community after community and country after country, which is basically what the book says is the reason for why nations fail. Is the wealth of a few are essentially economic vampires that suck the life out of the community or the country because of the way that they extract money, stuff from the interactions that normally would happen that can't happen because they took it out of the system. And then there was an article I read that said that rich people, wealthy people in the United States have $32 trillion in offshore tax shelters. I wonder where they got $32 trillion to put in the offshore tax shelters. Now, in conjunction with all of this, it's important to realize that when you set out to solve this problem in terms of individuals, communities, or nations, what we typically do is we look at a problem and we look for the solution to that problem close in time and space to where we perceive the problem to be. Though typically what we end up looking at or dealing with are the symptoms to the problem, not the real problem. Russ Ackoff, who was one of the giants in the systems field, said that we lost him a few years ago. was very fond of saying, wherever it is that you initially perceive the problem to be, with further investigation, you are more often than not likely to find that the real problem is somewhere else. It's because the symptom is evident, but what's causing that symptom is seldom not so evident. So that with a symptom, symptomatic solutions are usually quick and dirty. To deal with the homeless problem, we build shelters, which diminishes the homeless problem. Well, it doesn't actually diminish the reason for people being homeless. It simply gets the homeless people off the street. And as a consequence, there will be more homeless people to deal with in the future because the actual reason for homelessness is not being dealt with. The fundamental solutions are typically more involved and take longer, but they're meant to deal with the problem that's causing the symptom. Yet, it's sort of like turtles all the way down. For every symptom, there's a problem, and for every problem, it's just a symptom of something else. So you have to figure out where the appropriate level of interaction is to actually deal with the situation in a way that will provide relief over an extended period of time. The difficulty of dealing with symptoms and using symptomatic solutions is that by actually producing the symptomatic solution, the side effect is that it diminishes the awareness that the fundamental solution is needed, and the problem actually gets worse. This is actually a vicious reinforcing cycle, so that the side effect diminishes pursuing the fundamental solution, the symptom gets worse, which means you would need to apply the symptomatic solution even more. The typical response to being in debt is to go deeper in debt. The typical response to starving people is to feed them. Feeding them is important so they stay alive, but it's not the only thing that we should do, because if you just feed the homeless, 17 or 18 years later, you will have an even greater population explosion. If you simply feed the homeless, there will be more homeless that you need, or if you shelter the homeless, there will simply be more homeless you need to shelter in the future. If you build more low-cost housing, you will simply need more low-cost housing in the future. It's a vicious evolution if we don't figure out what the fundamental solutions are to the real crux of the problem, so that we don't have to deal with the same symptom over and over and over again. So that's the sort of the set of thoughts that I would offer today, and I hope you found it of some interest, and I will continue to allow the thoughts to simmer, and maybe they get a little bit clearer in the future. So take care. Bye.